We all love to talk about our favorite things, right? Like, in fact, it's one of the main ways that we connect with other people is that we like to talk about the things that we really enjoy. And sometimes we do that face to face, sometimes we do it through social media or through text. And you might talk to your friends about like BTS and your love of K-pop or your celeb crush or your favorite TikTok trend. So when we talk about the things that we love, what we're doing is we're saying like, I have so much joy around this thing or this topic or this idea, and I want to share that with you because I want you to experience that same joy. In fact, you might love something so much that you may have developed a reputation among your friends and family for like, they know that you love to talk about that thing, right? Like, for example, I love to talk about where I live. I love it here. And so my friends, if they're not careful, will find me in a conversation talking about how much I love living here. For you, you might have like a diehard loyalty to like a particular college basketball team, and you just go on and on about the new recruits for your team and how every other team is trash because you just love your team, right? Or maybe you love like a particular YouTuber and you think all of their videos are hilarious and you send them to your friends, and then when your friends are over at your house, you try to make them watch all of your YouTube videos. Or maybe you love a certain video game and you know exactly which friends will share your excitement when you talk about this video game, and then you look forward to playing it with them and then reliving the game with them. Talking about the stuff we're into, talking about the stuff that we really love, it's because we want other people to experience it the way that we do. And that's easy to make a habit in our lives. But I'm going to tell you a secret. Talking about God can actually be just like this. Regularly sharing about God with others can be a part of an everyday faith. Now, for many of us, when I see that, you're like, no, talking about God and our faith feels like super awkward. And I don't think other people want to talk about that with me. And I'm going to sound like a weirdo if I bring that up, right? Like that might be your first reaction. And frankly, that's why a lot of us don't talk about our faith. It's we don't want it to come across as like awkward. And we're afraid sometimes that if we do talk about our faith, that other people might be uncomfortable or offended that we're bringing it up, right? And maybe sometimes you're afraid to talk about your relationship with Jesus because you're afraid you're going to sound dumb, right? Like sometimes we don't know how to really explain what we think, and we're not exactly sure like how to start, and we're kind of afraid that people are going to ask us questions or challenge us on things that we don't have the answers to. And we're like, to talk about your faith, like, don't you need to like be a pastor and like know a bunch of Bible verses or like use big words or like have half the Bible memorized or like be able to like defend Christianity to other people? And so a lot of times we don't talk about God because it feels like a lot of like weird pressure. Like we have to know a lot of things that we don't know, and we just don't want to feel stupid. You might also avoid talking about your faith because you don't want others to think of you as narrow-minded and judgmental. Sadly, some Christians have gotten a reputation for being unkind to others, and you don't want to get lumped into that. And so to avoid getting lumped into that, you play it safe and you say nothing. And so you might feel nervous about even talking about God in your small group, like, which is interestingly enough, the place where we're like, yes, this is where we're going to talk about our faith, right? You might be curious about what it means to follow Jesus, but you're not sure how to bring it up even in small group. And honestly, we're afraid like, well, if I do bring it up, if I do ask those questions, is that going to be weird? Like, are other people going to think that I'm weird for bringing that up? Or it could be that we don't talk about God because we're frankly not really sure what we think. Even if we believe in God and even if we feel like we do understand some things, we're not positive that we have it all figured out. And we don't want to look like we don't know what we're talking about. So for that reason, we probably just like don't bring it up. A lot of times we might think that we have to know all the answers to have a conversation about God, that we need to have lots of, informed things to say before we even engage in a discussion. And until we have those details, we feel like we shouldn't say anything at all. And so that leaves a lot of people that are trying to understand and grow their faith basically saying nothing. It's totally normal to feel nervous when it comes to talking about God. And the reason why it's normal to feel nervous is because it actually matters. When we talk about anything else that matters to us, anything else that you're learning about and you're trying to understand, it is totally normal to have conversations with people about it. It doesn't mean that you have to have all the answers to have a conversation, right? Like you can talk about your favorite YouTuber or your favorite sports team or your favorite video game without knowing every single thing about it. And the same is true when we have a discussion about our faith. It's possible to just have conversations with other people that can actually grow our understanding without having to be an expert. You don't have to be an expert to have conversations with other people about God. And in fact, having conversations with other people is one of the best ways that you can actually grow in your understanding of God. Now, if that freaks you out still and you're like, I don't think so. I don't think I want to talk about God to anybody because I don't want to look dumb, right? Well, what if you thought about it this way? When you talk about God, you don't have to talk about what you know. You can talk about who you know. And if you're like, I don't feel like me and Jesus are best friends, you can actually talk about that. You can talk about how you want to grow in knowing Jesus, but that's a process and that you're still on that journey. In fact, this whole conversation about what it means to follow Jesus, talking about these things, is actually what helped the church to get started. The early church was started by a handful of people who were really passionate about knowing Jesus. Early believers couldn't necessarily answer every single question about Jesus, but they didn't let that stop them. They were so excited. They knew that experiencing Jesus and following him was the way they wanted to live their lives. And they wanted other people to be excited about that too. And so they would talk about him a lot as they were trying to figure out, what does it look like to follow Jesus? And they were having these conversations, and that doesn't mean that they had to understand everything in order to try to figure these things out with other people. In fact, one of the ways that we form really close bonds with other people is to talk about the things that are important to us, things that we're discovering, things that we're learning about. So talking about God is just kind of like the way you talk about everything else. Take some of the pressure off. You don't have to know everything to have a conversation. And in the Bible, in the book of Acts, it gives us an amazing picture of people talking about Jesus without being experts. Two of Jesus's friends and followers, Peter and John, told everyone about Jesus. And while this is going on, a few religious leaders noticed some things about them. You can find this in the book of Acts, chapter 4, verse 13. It says, when they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished, and they took note that these men had been with Jesus. So think about that. Other people are listening to Peter and John talk about Jesus, and they realize these are unschooled, ordinary men. In other words, they don't know everything. But they're not like, wow, look at those dummies. No, they're like, these guys have been with Jesus. We can learn from them. And I think that's a good example for us. We don't have to be the experts in order to have these conversations. Peter and John may not have been prepared to debate all of the ins and outs of Jesus's life, even though they had known him personally. But what they're able to talk about is who Jesus was. They knew him, they experienced him, and that's what they talked about. That's what left people listening amazed and impressed. Peter and John are talking about their relationship with Jesus. In other words, they're sharing how they knew God from their own experience. And that's the invitation for us, that when we go and talk about God, that we're not trying to be some like Bible scholars, right? That we can just talk about God from our own experience. And that's actually very compelling to other people because we really do want to hear other people's experiences with God. That's one of the ways we grow in our understanding of Him. And so, you might not know all of the answers. You know what? I don't either. But what we can know is we can talk about what we've experienced in our relationship with Jesus. We can share what we hope to learn, how we want to grow in our faith, the struggles we have. We can talk about Him so that we can share that journey with other people. Talking about God actually helps us to know Him better. And the more we share our thoughts and our experiences and our questions about God with others, the more we're going to be challenged to keep talking and keep learning and growing and getting to know God for ourselves. And it'll make sharing about God and learning more about Him just part of the way we do faith every single day. Talking about God helps us to know Him better. So how do we shift our thinking from thinking that any conversation about God is going to be super awkward and make us look real dumb, right? How do we change that thinking? Well, first we can remember that we don't need to know everything to talk about God because we can talk from our own experience. So you can just focus on who you're talking about, just like Peter and John did. Just talk about Jesus and your own experience with Him. You don't have to be an expert. If you've got questions and you're like, I'm not sure because I don't necessarily feel like I've got these things figured out for myself, and so I'm really reluctant to say anything. So let me give you just a couple of reminders. If you start questioning, like, I'm not sure if God made the world, talk to somebody about that. I encourage you to talk to people in your small group about it. Talk to your parents about it. If you're like, I'm not sure that Jesus has forgiven me, talk to somebody about it. I would love to talk to you about it. Or if you're not sure if God can comfort you when bad things happen, because maybe some bad things have happened to you and you don't feel all that comforted, talk to someone about it. It's actually through these conversations that we deepen our faith. Share the questions you have with your small group leader, with a trusted friend, with your parents. Simply start a conversation about your faith and see what happens. Just like anything else we're excited about and learning about, it's one of the ways that we connect with other people and we can grow from their understanding. Finally, one last thing that I want us to take away from Peter and John's conversations about God and what He's done in their lives is that what I love most about Peter and John and how other people recognize that they're unschooled, right, is that they're just talking about their experience with Jesus. And you can talk about that just from a really honest place. Talk about what you've seen God do in your own life. So, for example, if you've prayed a prayer to God and you've seen Him answer it, talk about that. And if you're like, that doesn't seem like that big of a deal, that is evidence of God at work in your life. That's from your own experience. Or if you feel like God has helped you change your attitude towards maybe your siblings or your parents, and you're like, yeah, I used to just be really angry at them all the time. And now I'm more compassionate to them and why they do the things that they do. Talk about how God has softened your heart and changed the way that you think about them. Or if you've ever seen God do something amazing in your life or in the life of somebody you know, talk about that. That's your own experience. And it can be something big, it can be something small. Just talk about your own experience of following Jesus. Tell your own stories. Talk about what you've experienced and just focus on who God is in your life. Just like anything else, when you have those conversations, you're going to get to hear about how God shows up in other people's life. And that is a huge encouragement to growing your own faith. Peter and John, they just kept talking about God. They were excited to talk about it, right? And thousands of people's lives were changed as a result of their willingness to just keep talking about God. They didn't have all the answers, and they certainly didn't have all of the experiences. You know, many of the experiences of Jesus are with other people, right? And then God is moving uniquely through each and every person. So they're not experts, they don't know everything about God, but they were just willing to engage in these conversations and to tell their own story. And they both wrote about it, and thousands of years later, millions of people have read their words because they both wrote different parts of our Bible. And so talking about God really helped to grow the Christian faith. But the way the Christian faith grows broadly is it grows in each of us individually. And so by having these conversations, this is how we're able to grow. So remember, talking about God helps us to know Him better, and it helps us to grow in our understanding of who He is. And just like anything else that you're learning about or that you're excited about, I encourage you to not be intimidated to talk about your faith. To just have these conversations just like you would anything else. That's how we grow our faith every day. That's how we make growing our faith a habit.